It's Platt, and today we try a beer from the world's oldest brewery. That's next to Platt's Beer of the Week. So today I thought I'd kind of wrap up the Oktoberfest beers. This particular one is a Festbier. Comes to us from the fine folks at Weihenstephaner. I'm hopefully saying that right. They claim to be the world's oldest brewery, which is an incredible feat unto itself. Weihenstephaner is located in Freising, Bavaria, just outside of Munich. Up until about the 1950s, 1960s, it was claimed that the brewery was founded all the way back in the year 1146, which is just mind-boggling to think about that. But apparently, since then, some records and there have been some records and artifacts and things collected that state that the Bishop of Freising had given the Abbey a license to produce beer. This is a classic monastery beer, or the brewery was founded with a monastery, and that the Bishop of Freising had given him permission in the year 1046 to begin brewing. Little context, that's roughly 1,000 years ago. That is just insane. Now, this date is kind of in dispute. Now, they obviously claim it on their website, but it's 1,000 years ago. It's kind of really hard to establish any kind of records. We're talking about pre-printing press. These dates may or may not be real exact, but they claim 1046 as their founding date. Now, as far as any actual records or government documents, tax filing, stuff like that, the first actual records that we still have of today that, can be verified are dating from the year 1675, but pretty much everybody agrees that the brewery had been around way before that, and maybe even before they claim they were founded. Apparently, there's been some archaeological discoveries and some findings and some writings that claim that in and around the monastery, all the way back in the year 768, they were growing hops. Now, that doesn't always mean they were brewing beer at the time. Back then, a lot of times beer wasn't brewed with hops. Beer was something called gruit. But also, too, people aren't eating hops or whatever, so if you're growing them, there's got to be a purpose. But just mind-boggling numbers. Give a little context. That's roughly about 300 years after the fall of Rome. Unbelievable. To kind of move ahead a little more toward modern times, in the year 1803, secularization had hit Germany. The church had really started to wane in power, and the Bavarian government decided to take over the abbey and the brewery. They ended up switching the name to the Royal Bavarian Brewing Company at Weihenstephaner. It became a state-controlled brewery, and it's still a state-controlled brewery today. Now, it is ran more like a business. They have their own marketing arm, distribution. There's not a ton of government interference per se. About 100 or so years later, about 120 years later, in 1921, they ended up changing the name to Weihenstephaner Brewing, the same name they use today. They did kind of build out the grounds a little bit, make it a little more tourist-friendly. They do some tours. They also have a brewing school there. What a great thing that would be to, go to the oldest brewery in the world to learn brewing. So real cool there. Now, you would have to expect a brewery in Germany that's been around as long as they have would definitely be into the German beer purity law of 1516. Heck, they were probably around 500 years before it. So all the beers at Weihenstephaner follow the Reinheitsgebot, or the purity laws. And so they kind of stick to the classic German styles. They do Weissbiers, Helles, Pilsners, Dunkels, Doppelbocks, Keller beers. Unlike Paulaner, which we talked about earlier, they don't have any products that stray away from that German purity law. So they don't do any things like, shandies, rattlers, any kind of flavored beer. Probably the closest thing to outside the box beers they do is they do a low ABV version of their Helles and their Weiss beers, and that's it. Well, before we try this beer though, let's check out the stats. Well, today I thought, since we're trying a beer from the oldest brewery in the world, we'd talk about some of the other older breweries in the world. Again, some of these numbers are mind-boggling, especially if you think here in the States, you think of a brewery like Sierra Nevada or Anchor Brewing, 40, 50-year-old breweries. They seem like they're the old man, the grandfathers of the business, and they're just children compared to some of the breweries over in Europe. So I thought we'd kind of talk about them. First is one of the other claimants to the oldest brewery in the world. It's Weltenberg Brewing in Weltenberg, Germany. They claim they were founded in the year 1050. Again, it's not one of these monastery breweries. The brewery survived, the church not so much. But again, we're talking about almost 1,000 years for some of these places. You can only imagine the techniques they were using back then, and kind of the limited supplies they had. Next we have Hubertus in Austria, founded in the year 1454. Now they got an interesting story. On their beers, they have a green label with a picture of a stag on there. Kind of like a variation of the Jägermeister thing, but it's more just the stags in straight white. Apparently the story behind that was one of the original friars or monks that ran the monastery loved to hunt. And apparently one day was out on a hunt for deer when he had a vision. And it was God telling him, get back to work at the monastery, quit your hunting, get back to work. And so he had a stag head as the emblem, the logo for the brewery. Interesting story. Next we move to Poland and Werka. Werka was founded in the year 1478. That's about 300 years before the Declaration of Independence. Again, mind-boggling numbers. The brewery is still going today, but I believe the brand and the company has been rolled into another larger conglomerate, but the brewery itself and the brand itself is still alive and kicking after 525 or almost 550 years. Again, amazing. Next we come over to this side of the pond, and here in the U.S., as many of you may or may not know, Yuengling is the oldest continuous brewery here in the U.S., founded in 1829. Not only is it America's oldest brewery, but it's also the largest privately owned brewery. So it's still kind of kept in the club. Next we go back over the pond to Ireland and Smithwick's. Smithwick's was founded in the year 1710. And it beat out the brewery that produces Guinness by about 20 years or so. So Smithwick's is the oldest in Ireland. And the last brewery we're going to talk about is Molson. It is It's Canada's oldest brewery, 1786, 10 years after the Declaration of Independence. Not only is it Canada's oldest brewery, but it's North America's oldest brewery. So very interesting, some great old breweries. One of these days, I'd love to get out and see them all. Well, enough about that. Let's drink some beer. Well, one of the first things we're going to notice is this is a decent bit lighter than the other classic Marzen / Oktoberfest beers we've tried. Doing a little research on this beer, apparently the Oktoberfest style beers evolved over the years. The original beers served at the original Oktoberfest were more dunkels. They're pretty dark, and that was because back then, if you really didn't have a lot of controls when you start toasting grains. A lot of times you just, all right, we'll have regular kind of pale malt, and then we'll have dark malt, and we'll just kind of change the mixture. Like getting a toasted or roasted or that, was kind of hard to hit. But apparently through the ages, obviously the technology has improved, and so they were able to use lighter malts, and that's when we went from the dunkels to kind of the Marzens. And Marzens became the beers through pretty much the 1800s, and starting in the 1900s up until, I want to say the 50s, 60s, 70s, the Fest beer now has kind of moved in. Palates have gotten lighter. People like lighter colored beers, lighter body beers. So the Fest beer is just a little bit lighter. Still in the very drinkable lager category. It's Get a little nose. Pretty much straight malt on the nose. That's nice, real nice. A little more flavor, a little more body than you would think on it. You're looking at this beer, you're thinking blonde ale. I mean, it's not quite light like an American light beer, but you're thinking, you know, kind of the blonde ale type beers, golden ales. A little more body. Get a hint, just a hint at the end of some of those biscuity, toasty, toffee, you know, kind of roasted malt notes. Body-wise, medium minus, fairly easy drinking. Almost has a little Euro funk to it, but nothing too bad. It comes in a brown bottle, so it's not skunking, you know, like your classic kind of green beer, Heineken, you know, green bottled Heineken or whatever, but definitely a Euro flair to it, I guess the best way to put it. Again, overall, a very drinkable beer, though. Well, I hope you liked this video. If you did, please subscribe down below. Also, please like the video because it lets YouTube know we're putting out good content. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, or beers that you'd like me to try, please leave me in the comment section, or you can always contact me on the Twitter page. Till next time, bottoms up.